Well, I've got a rare afternoon off work, and what I love doing is coming down to the lake and actually going out and looking what's underneath. So I do this with a snorkel. Now, I must say, I do this every single time with someone here. I've got Mike with me today. I'm going out into relatively shallowish water, but there is lots of weed there, so you always got to be very careful. But it always opens my eyes to what you see underneath the surface, and it's fascinating. I absolutely love it. But this time, I'm going to take my GoPro and have a look. Now, I've took a GoPro on many occasions when I'm testing baits. I test particularly the solubility of some of our liquids, and I've had some amazing reactions underwater, and I started filming this years and years ago, but that's probably a separate video on its own. But for now, we're going to go out, I'm going to get dressed or get undressed into me snorkeling gear and see what we can find. Well, before exerting any energy, I thought I'd best do a little warm-up, and yeah, at my ripe old age, it's always good just to stretch the old limbs out before you get in the really cold water. So that's just what I did. So fishing out my old snorkeling gear, I've had this in the back of the van for quite a while now. Always good to break it out, and it's on days like this, it's yeah, perfect for it. The algae dropped out of the water and the clarity was enough to go out and see, hopefully, what I needed to see. So paddling out across the weed, what you can't see on here, but there's actually loads and loads of minute bubbles coming off the weed where it's photosynthesizing, where you get lots of the oxygen that's pumped out from the weed all through the daylight hours. So it's very hard for my eye to pick it out, and the camera can't pick it out because they're so small, but there's loads and loads of little bubbles coming off the weed. So it's a great place for the fish to go and spend good chunks of the day because of the high oxygen level of this particular body area of the lake. Perfect for the fish digesting their food. You see the odd bubble coming up from the weed or two. But also the weed was quite high in places, and straight away line lay. 100% line lay going over these areas. I thought it was going to stand out like a sore thumb, and I wasn't wrong. So straight away I found a little hole in between the weed that had been digged out by the carp, and this is typical in these big weed beds. It looks like a forest, but in actual fact you can go down in most spots there and look down, and you will see these tiny little areas which are just impossible to put baits. You never ever cast to them, and they remain exactly what they are, little feeding spots, the carp's personal little hot spots. What is worth noting on this is the temperature change. When you're over the weed, it's like a warm carpet. It had been soaking up the rays of the sun of that day, and it was warm compared to the other parts of the lake that were particularly cold. So all these thermoclines and all these warm spots and cold spots on the lake all has to be taken in consideration when you're fishing. Particularly the undertow as well. There was a slight undertow coming from my right to left, and these are all things that we all take for granted and don't realise that are all going on in the lake all the time. It was lovely swimming out through the underwater. You get a real sense of calm, but it's noisy as well. It's surprising, the noise. I could hear birds diving not too far away, and that echoes through the water. And it's really it's like a turbulent underwater. And every time I touched or moved my skin, rubbed on my skin, I could hear that so clear. So these fish must be picking up on sounds naturally transmitted through the water. Well, after 10 minutes or so, still couldn't see any fish, but there's just blankets and blankets of weed everywhere. So I was keen to get out a bit further out into the pond, maybe hit to some of the more deeper water and just try to find some spots, and who knows, maybe find a fish or two. Well, all this weed at this time of year is still vigorous, it's still standing up proud, but I knew in a month or two's time, as we get into autumn, this will all be collapsing, and these weed beds would be flatter to the lake bed, but also provide such a snag for the fish in an area where safety, comfort, and of course, as the weed starts to break down and with the sunlight hitting the weed, it's going to be a warm blanket for the carp. So it's no surprise to me that the fish like to spend a good amount of time in and around these dying weed beds all year round, but also particularly in the winter months as well. Wow, I wasn't expecting suddenly out of my vision I've spotted a carp, then another carp, and another carp. Wow, and yeah, I was in for a right treat. These fish didn't spook, which is not unusual. I've seen this before. They very much treat me like something in their environment. So to them, I'm a big fish, a huge fish. But as long as you're quiet and you don't make too many sounds or quick movements, they're inquisitive. And yeah, I haven't swam with dolphins, but I swam with carp, and this was a real treat to have these fish circling me, and they spent a long time with me as well. Now, some of these fish would come and take one look at me and they'd be gone. I probably wouldn't see one or two of them, but the majority of them, and particularly the ones that are more inquisitive in nature, and it all comes down to the carp's personality, they were coming back time and time again. So I was seeing the same fish regularly coming back, circling me, coming back 5 minutes later. So it's fascinating to watch. These are incredibly inquisitive creatures, and there must be some form of communication at some level that between all of them. I can't not think that from swimming with fish and just watching how they interact with each other. So as a little test, having my flippers on, I'm literally just about touching the floor at the moment, and if I was to rub my flippers along the lake bed, making a hell of a noise, like a scratching noise, then the carp would come in and have a look. They were so inquisitive, and that sound traveling underwater, they are so switched onto it. So when they're feeding on shrimps, snails, particularly sort of your mollusks, so your crushing shell, zebra mussels for example, then that was when they were coming in and they showed the most interest. So a little paddle of my feet, even if I rubbed the flippers together to make sound underwater, that was sparking an interest, and it was amazing to watch these fish just come in pure inquisitive and come and see what I was doing in their environment. Amazing. So when the carp are crunching large food items, be it bits of swan mussel, zebra mussels and that's a really noisy sound. I've actually listened to this sound in the carp that we have in our tank at Baitworks. We put pellets in there, and if you're quiet you can hear them crunching. It's no different to us chewing peanuts or something like that. So you can well imagine that, tiger nuts or any of those baits that in sight, a crunch in them, are going to be attracting fish, and as those fish swim off the spot past their mates, say 30-40 yards away crunching, those fish are well aware, they know what's going on, and they're coming back to see where his mates just had that free meal from. What it did do was give me a massive appreciation of the underwater environment. It's so peaceful, gliding and floating about, and the areas over was an area that gets fished by the anglers a lot, so I know that the line lay coming into that would have been absolutely horrendous, but it's a spot that produces fish, and lo and behold there was a lot of fish there as well, which was amazing to see. But yeah, just seeing the angles of the weed and how you try and present bait was a huge, I think can be a huge problem, and the reasons why the fish can vacate the area very quickly. They'll be all aware of a line going through the water, and with the weed up so high and the going down to the baited area underneath, it was always going to be a problem. One thing that really interests me was diving down to base level, so diving down and looking along the bottom, and that really gives you the true perspective of the undulations that are across all lakes, and they change with undertow and change over time with carp feeding and etc. But it hit home to me that no matter what we think in terms of how our bait's presented, the reality of it is very, very different. And seeing at base level all these dips and troughs just hammer home to me that line lay is crucially important. Rigs that throw themselves away from the lead, but you're never going to get them lying dead flat. So it poses more questions than answers, to be fair. Every time I dive in the lake, I come out learning something different, or there's another question that pops in my head. But that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. And yeah, I think with more diving and snorkeling, and you can come up hopefully with some solutions to those problems. But yeah, absolutely fascinating to go and see it. So looking at some of these spots then, they're all covered in a layer of sediment. I think that's true of every lake that I've been in and dived. Every single time you'll see, I suppose you're expecting to see polished, clean gravel, but actually the reality of it is very, very different. You've got sediment over everything, and on some of those spots you get some little holes where the carp have obviously gone in and fed down 2 or 3 inches and make little depressions in there, but of course you can't really see that from above. It's only when you're coming in at an angle or diving down you can actually see these depressions going down 2 or 3 inches. You're never going to find it on a marker rod, so it just doesn't get seen or even looked at until obviously you go out there with cameras. So seeing this layer of sediment and these little feed holes on the spots is I can narrow down sort of those feeding areas where the fish are feeding, a spot within a spot, if you like, and you just don't get to see that unless you're in the margins or up trees, and even then it's difficult. But yeah, seeing these little craters and holes are just another fascinating insight into their underwater world. One thing I find in the lakes all the time are these structure. So whether there's a stick, whether there's a boulder, a rock, a car tire, whatever it may be, the fish use these all the time. They're not necessarily feeding areas, but they're an area where the fish will go to rub. And the rubbing motion is, in my opinion, is to remove parasites. The fish have parasites all through the year, particularly as they're coming out of winter, where they've been sort of lying in weed beds. It's a chance for the parasites to attach to the carp, and they're trying to dislodge them all through the year, particularly in the spring months. And having these areas, whether it be sticky clay, on a lot of the clay patches which I dive on, I can see the fin marks where the fish have literally flanked on it and rubbed their fins have just caught the sides. You can see these like scratches going along them. So having those areas on the lake are used frequently by the carp, and I say any sort of structure, not necessarily great places to put a bait, but at the end of the day carp are going to be in that area, so anywhere near that is a great spot. That was amazing. Often going out with the old snorkel and that, sometimes you bump into fish, but I bumped into a shed load out there. I just hope I've picked it up on the old GoPro. There was loads out there, loads of big ones, all circling me as well, and it's amazing to watch the fish. They're so inquisitive. They don't know what you are, but you're in their environment, and yeah, they don't really spook. It's quite surreal. It's like swimming with dolphins. Amazing. So wow, that was an eye-opener. Got to see loads of spots, loads of interesting areas, some carp tunnels as well. But all in all, that was an absolutely amazing 25 minutes. Right, I'm gonna get out, get some clothes on. I'm freezing. It's warmer in there than it is out here.